My name is Stephanie. I am 21 years old. And until recently, I lived in a house where everything looked beautiful on the outside and suffocating on the inside. People used to compliment our family at church or at neighborhood events. They'd say things like, "Your parents must be so proud," or "I bet you have everything you need." I would smile politely, nod, and say thank you, while carefully keeping the truth hidden behind my well-ironed dress and practiced composure. My father, Richard, is a financial advisor. Not the kind who simply manages portfolios, but the kind who believes money is power, and power belongs to him. Every decision in our house ran through him. Where we lived, what we wore, even what we ate. He had a way of making generosity feel like debt, as long as I pay for it. "You'll do it my way." That phrase followed me through childhood like a shadow I couldn't outrun. My mother, Margaret, ran the house like it was a lifestyle brand. She coordinated holiday cards with color themes, sent out newsletters updating extended family on our milestones, and always made sure our house smelled like cinnamon during the winter months. But underneath the charm and the matching throw pillows was a woman who saw me as her unfinished canvas. I wasn't her daughter. I was her second chance to relive her own youth. Only better. Cleaner. More impressive. She reminded me constantly that she had been homecoming queen, class president, and valedictorian. It wasn't a memory. It was a measuring stick. And I never quite measured up. If I got a B+, she would ask why it wasn't an A. If I got an A, she'd ask why it wasn't an A+. My art projects were messy. My friends were inappropriate. My jeans weren't flattering. It didn't matter what I did. I was always one step behind what she had envisioned. By the time I hit high school, I learned to edit myself in every room. I wore the clothes she picked, smiled when I was supposed to, and kept quiet when my opinions didn't align with theirs. I wasn't allowed to take theater because it interfered with SAT prep. I wasn't allowed to hang out after school unless the friends' parents had been pre-approved by my mother. Even my Instagram account was reviewed weekly for what she called tone and presentation. I wasn't grounded in the traditional way. My punishments were subtler. Access to my car would disappear. My phone plan would suddenly be downgraded. Gift cards I received for birthdays would mysteriously end up in her drawer. Under the guise of helping me budget better, Richard believed that real discipline didn't need to shout. It only needed to show you what could be taken away. I knew better than to argue. Resistance didn't lead to compromise. It led to lectures. And my parents didn't fight fair. They brought up old mistakes, twisted meanings, and turned any sign of emotion into evidence of my instability. So I grew quiet. I learned to adapt. And I told myself that once I got into college, things would be different. They weren't. They offered to pay part of my tuition, but only if the account stayed in their names. They sent monthly budget spreadsheets with comments and suggested revisions. I wasn't studying design. I was submitting my life for review, and every month, the message was the same. You exist because we allow it. You continue because we fund it. I wasn't a person in their eyes. I was a project, and one that was failing to meet expectations. From the outside, we looked like the perfect family, but inside, I was shrinking, quietly, methodically, dangerously. I turned 22 on a Tuesday. I didn't expect a party. I'd learned long ago not to get my hopes up on birthdays, but I allowed myself the smallest bit of hope that morning. Maybe there would be a card, a kind word, some reminder that I was still their daughter, not just a disappointing investment. That morning at breakfast, I mentioned casually that my best friend Jessica wanted to take me out for dinner. My mother looked up from her tablet just long enough to say, "We should talk about your plans later." My father nodded slightly, then went back to spreading butter on his toast like it was a financial transaction. I knew that tone. Something was coming, but I didn't know it would be the end of everything. I I spent the day on campus pretending to be fine. Jessica texted me a gif of dancing cupcakes. Tyler from my design class called me a genius. My professor pulled me aside after class and told me my portfolio was showing real vision. I held on to those small pieces of affirmation like life rafts. Because deep down, I already sensed the tide turning. When I got home that evening, both of my parents were sitting in the living room, side by side. Their posture too formal, too rehearsed. My father had a manila folder on the coffee table. My mother had that look she reserved for difficult conversations. Lips pursed. Ease unreadable. Sit down. Stefani, my father said. It wasn't a request. I sat on the edge of the armchair, still wearing my backpack. My birthday cupcake, the one I had bought for myself from the campus bakery, was in a paper bag by my side. We've been reviewing the household finances, he began, flipping open the folder. What he had were printouts of my banking transactions, highlighted and annotated like a quarterly earnings report. Your expenses are becoming unreasonable, he said. My mother added, it's not just the money. It's your constant resistance to direction. Direction. That's what they called it. This major of yours. Graphic design. It's not sustainable. My father continued. We've allowed you to explore this interest. But enough is enough. It's not an interest, I said quietly. It's what I'm good at. I've built a portfolio. I'm getting internship offers. My professors. Your professors aren't paying your tuition, he snapped. And neither will we. My mother added. Not anymore. I thought they were bluffing. They weren't. We've paid your final month of tuition, my father said, pulling out a typed list. Your car insurance ends today. Your phone plan ends at the end of the month. Your health coverage ends immediately. You have until tonight to pack your things. I stared at them, unblinking. It didn't feel real. Tonight, as in now, the date is irrelevant. My mother said. We've made our decision. I stood up slowly, the room spinning. You can't just throw me out. We can. And we are, my father said. You're an adult now. Time to act like one. You'll be back in a week, he added with a smirk. Ready to change majors and come to your senses. I didn't argue. I couldn't. My throat had closed around the words I wanted to scream. I went upstairs and packed in silence. 2 suitcases. My laptop. My portfolio. A few changes of clothes. Most of what I owned had been technically given to me by them. Now I understood those gifts had always come with conditions. You have 30 minutes. My father called up. Anything left behind becomes our property. I texted Jessica, barely able to type through the shaking. They're kicking me out. Tonight. Can I stay with you? Her reply came instantly. I'm coming to get you. I told her I'd drive myself. There was no time. As I dragged my suitcases downstairs, my mother stood with her, arms crossed. You'll regret this, she said. I didn't reply. At the door, my father held out his hand. House key. I removed it from my keychain with trembling fingers. When you're ready to talk about a more reasonable path, you can call us, my mother said. I won't be calling, I said. Surprising, even myself with the calm in my voice. The door closed behind me. I heard the deadbolt lock. Rain had started falling. It soaked through my hair as I loaded my things into the car. Happy birthday to me. Jessica's apartment was barely big enough for 2 people, let alone 3. But she didn't hesitate. She opened her door and didn't ask questions until I was sitting on her couch with my damp hair clinging to my forehead and my knees pulled to my chest. Her roommate, Rachel, brought me a towel and a mug of peppermint tea. I couldn't finish. I hadn't realized how cold I was until I started shivering. That first night, I didn't cry. I just stared at the ceiling. wide awake while Jessica and Rachel whispered in the other room. My suitcase sat beside the couch like a silent witness. I didn't unpack. I didn't want to admit this wasn't temporary. I kept telling myself I just needed a few days to figure things out. By morning, the reality had settled in. I had no home, no health insurance, no financial safety net. The only money I had was in a small personal account I'd kept hidden from my parents. When I checked the balance, it was frozen. A notification said the account had been flagged for investigation. My parents had claimed it was opened fraudulently, even though it was in my name. I spent that day bouncing between the financial aid office and student services, trying to find someone who could help. The answers were always the same. We need documentation, proof that your parents have cut ties, tax forms, legal emancipation. I had none of it. I left every building with more paperwork than solutions. My shifts at the coffee shop were barely enough to cover meals, let alone rent. I begged my manager for more hours. He gave me 10. It was the best he could do. I showered at the campus gym and kept my things in a grocery bag under the kitchen sink at Jessica's place. Her roommate never complained, even when I started sleeping with my phone on silent, terrified that another message from my father would set me off. They didn't stop at cutting me off. My mother sent a group message to extended family, claiming I had run away during a rebellious phase and refused all help. My aunt replied with a long paragraph about how disappointing it must be to raise an ungrateful daughter. I read the message 3 times, each word burning more than the last. Jessica did everything she could. She made space where there wasn't any. She cooked cheap pasta and reminded me to eat. She even gave up her bed for a night so I could sleep without a metal bar digging into my back. But I still felt like an intruder, like a ghost trying to pass as a person. In class, I couldn't focus. I missed deadlines. I forgot critique. My work lost its spark. Professor Willis pulled me aside after our advanced design seminar. She said, "Whatever's happening in your life, it's showing up in your work." She was right. My lines were off, my colors dull. I was going through the motions, holding my breath in every space I entered. I stopped answering unknown numbers. I stopped checking my email. I moved through the day like I was made of smoke. At night, I barely slept. 3 hours here, 2 hours there. I'd lie on Jessica's lumpy couch listening to cars pass by the window, wondering how everything could unravel so fast. Wondering if maybe my parents were right. Maybe I wouldn't survive on my own. Maybe I was. In fact, I wouldn't. I didn't say any of this out loud. I kept it tucked behind small smiles and polite thank yous. Because when people tell you long enough that you're weak, sometimes you start to believe them. And when you lose everything at once, you learn very quickly how invisible you can become in a world that never stops smiling. It started with a conversation I hadn't planned to have. Tyler and I were working late in the design lab, both of us trying to finish our portfolio pieces before midterms. He noticed how distracted I was, how I kept checking my phone, refreshing the same screen over and over again. Finally, he asked if I was dealing with bank issues. I didn't mean to open up, but the words came out before I could stop them. My parents froze my account. They kicked me out last week. Now they're making sure I can't touch the last few dollars I saved. Tyler didn't react with pity. He just nodded, like he'd heard it before. My dad did something similar. He said, "When I came out, he tried to control me through money when emotional control stopped working." "What did you do?" I asked. "Not all of it was legal," he said with a half smile. But I learned more than I ever wanted to about how fragile financial systems really are. We started talking, not just about our situations, but about how most people, especially older adults, ruse passwords, never change their security questions, and link all their accounts to the same recovery email they made 10 years ago. It hit me like a switch flipping. I had helped my parents set up their online banking years ago. They never updated anything. I still knew the passwords. I still knew the recovery email. I had built the very system they were now using to shut me out. Tyler leaned back in his chair. Just saying. You might still have more access than they realize. I didn't want their money. That wasn't the point. What I wanted was for them to feel what I had felt. Disoriented. Powerless. Stripped of stability. But I wasn't interested in getting arrested. I didn't want to steal anything. I just wanted to take their sense of control and twist it. Just enough to make them squirm. Tyler helped me understand the difference between hacking and using credentials you already have legal access to. There are things you can do that don't change account balances, but change access. You don't need to touch the money to make the system lock them out of it. The first tool was a credit freeze. It's completely legal. It prevents new lines of credit from being opened. It's framed as protection, but it's also a block. I learned how to submit fraud alerts using the information I knew they wouldn't question. Birth dates, addresses, social security numbers I had memorized from years of tax form drills around the kitchen table. The second move was subtle. Change the answer to a security question by one character. Enough to trigger a mismatch, but not enough to raise suspicion. The bank wouldn't flag it, but it would block password resets. Then came the timing. Their credit card bills hit around the third blank powered. The car payment usually processed on the fourth. The country club fee pulled on the fifth. If I created disruptions at just the right moment, auto payments would fail. Verification would stall. Late fees would stack. I planned it like a design project. Clean. Minimal. Precise. I set up a secure email to monitor the results. No fingerprints. No confrontation. Just elegant. Invisible consequence. When I got back to Jessica's that night, she asked if I was okay. I told her I was just tired. And I was tired of playing the victim. Tired of shrinking. Tired of pretending they hadn't broken something inside me. They wanted to teach me a lesson by leaving me out in the rain on my birthday. Now it was my turn to educate them. Not with shouting. Not with begging. With silence. And strategy. The first sign came through a forwarded group text from my cousin Stephanie. Not me. The other one. She sent a screenshot of a message from my mother. Margaret. To a handful of relatives. Something strange is happening with our accounts. Richard thinks it might be identity theft. We're dealing with banks all day. If anyone needs to reach us, call instead of texting. I stared at the screen for a moment. Expressionless. Then put the phone face down on the table. By that afternoon, the real fallout began. A friend of Jessica's mom happened to be at a garden club luncheon that Margaret was hosting. According to the story that made its way back to us, Margaret had taken a group of her friends to a high-end restaurant. Linen napkins. Floral centerpieces. The whole production. When the bill came, her card was declined. She laughed it off and handed them a backup. It failed too. She ended up having to call another member of the club to cover the bill, someone who absolutely would not let her forget it. That same day, Richard's corporate card was declined during a business lunch with potential clients. According to one of his assistants, who shared the story with Jessica's mother over coffee, he had to ask a junior associate to pay, promising reimbursement. The assistant said Richard looked like he'd swallowed glass. Within 48 hours, automatic payments on their car lease and country club membership failed. Margaret had to cancel her salon appointment. Richard rescheduled meetings, citing system issues at the firm. Their perfectly controlled image was slipping, and they had no idea why. I monitored it all from my borrowed spot on Jessica's couch. Checking the secure email I'd set up, I didn't tamper with anything directly. I simply used the systems they had trusted and layered just enough friction into their routine to make it all fall apart. Their requests to reset passwords triggered new security protocols. Their attempts to unlock accounts hit dead ends because the answers to their security questions no longer matched exactly parters. Everything looked like a glitch. A system error. A digital inconvenience. They filed a police report. The report went nowhere. Nothing had been stolen. The banks explained that their accounts were simply under review for suspicious activity, all legitimate procedures, all reversible, but not fast, not clean, and certainly not convenient. I never touched a cent. I never broke a law. I simply took the systems they used to control me and held them up like a mirror. It was quiet. It was calculated. And it was devastating. I heard through family friends that the tension between them had escalated fast. Margaret accused Richard of being careless. Richard accused Margaret of using outdated passwords. They blamed each other for the mess. Their carefully constructed unity, cracking under pressure. I didn't smile. I didn't cheer. I just breathed. This wasn't revenge born of rage. It was the language they understood. Order. Control. Systems. They had raised me on rules and discipline and power structures. I was simply responding in kind. Watching their lives tilt off balance didn't undo what they did to me. It didn't fix the ache or erase the memory of standing on the porch in the rain, holding my own key out to the man who had once called me his daughter. But it did something else. It reminded me that I wasn't powerless. They thought they could discard me and walk away untouched. They were wrong. Jessica caught me one night as I was refreshing the monitoring email for the 10th time in an hour. She didn't raise her voice. She just said it quietly. The way someone speaks when they love you too much to lie. You look at that inbox the same way your dad used to stare at his spreadsheets. All control and no peace. I didn't respond. I just closed the laptop a little slower than usual. She wasn't wrong. At first, tracking their spiral had felt like justice. A way to reclaim something they'd stolen. But now, weeks later, it was something else entirely. I wasn't just watching them struggle. I was waiting for it, depending on it. And in doing so, I was tying myself to the very people I'd sworn to walk away from. My grades were slipping. I missed another project deadline in advanced design. My professor, who had once said I had something rare, pulled me aside and asked if I was okay. I told him I was just tired. He gave me an extension. I didn't deserve it. At the coffee shop, I started messing up drink orders. My manager was patient, but I could see the hesitation growing behind his eyes. I was becoming unreliable. That scared me more than anything. Not because I feared being fired, but because I recognized the pattern. I was letting myself fall apart again, just in a different direction. Then the email came. It was from a design firm in the city, one of the top firms, the kind that didn't usually notice students like me. Professor Willis had submitted my portfolio without telling me. They wanted to schedule an interview for a summer internship. Paid. Prestigious. Real. It should have felt like validation. Like a door opening. Instead, I found myself thinking about whether I'd have time to manage the next wave of chaos I'd set in motion. That was the moment I knew. I had become so focused on making them feel lost that I'd lost myself in the process. I wasn't healing. I was circling. And all that energy, every ounce of strategy, every late-night tweak to a security setting, that was energy I could have used to move forward. I sat with that realization for a long time. No outbursts. No drama. Just silence. A different kind of silence than I had grown up with. This one was mine. The next day, I went to the university library and created a secure message. I used the anonymous account I'd built for monitoring. Inside the email, I included detailed instructions, how to reset passwords, how to verify identities, how to contact the credit bureaus. I formatted it like a standard help message from a security vendor. I set it to send in 2 days. It wasn't forgiveness, and it wasn't surrender. It was a decision to stop wasting my life answering pain with more pain. That night, I told Jessica. She didn't say anything at first. Then she hugged me so tightly I almost forgot how tired I was. Letting go doesn't mean they didn't hurt you, she whispered. It just means they don't get to hurt you forever. The next morning, I woke up and didn't check the email, for the first time in weeks. I opened my design tablet instead. I started sketching again. Not to impress anyone. Not for a deadline. Just because I could. Just because I still had something left to build. And I wanted it to be mine. The email went out on a Wednesday. I didn't check for a reply. I didn't track what happened next. I just let it go. And in that space, quiet and unfamiliar, I began to build something new. A week later, I got a call from the campus housing office. A studio unit had opened up in graduate housing. Available mid-semester due to a withdrawal. It was barely bigger than a dorm room. But it had a door that locked from the inside. A tiny kitchenette. And no one asking where I was going or when I'd be back. I signed the paperwork that same day. 2 days after that, I started my new job in the university's design department. Professor Willis had pulled strings to get me a part-time position, creating marketing materials for campus events. It paid just enough to cover groceries, bus fare, and a small emergency fund. More importantly, it gave me a reason to show up every day. It gave me structure, purpose, a sense that my skills mattered. When my emergency housing term ended, I moved in with Jessica and Rachel. Officially this time. We found a 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of town with mismatched furniture, creaky floors, and more laughter than any place I'd ever lived. We split groceries, took turns with laundry, and taped our weekly to-do list to the fridge with a glittery magnet shaped like a cat. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. At first, I kept my story close, only sharing it with people I trusted. But word spreads in quiet ways on a college campus. And soon I was getting coffee with students I barely knew. People who had been cut off, shut out, or emotionally orphaned by families who didn't understand them. Some were queer, some had chosen non-traditional careers. Some had just said no one too many times and paid the price. They weren't asking me for advice, most of the time. They just needed someone who understood what it felt like to carry shame that didn't belong to them. So I listened. And when they asked how I made it through, I told the truth. I said it was hard. I said it was lonely. But I also said it didn't define me forever. Every time I said it out loud, I believed it a little more myself. I applied for additional scholarships, including one for students who were financially independent due to family estrangement. I was awarded enough to cover the rest of my tuition. The relief came not just from the money, but from the acknowledgement. Someone had seen my struggle and said, "You matter anyway." That spring, my portfolio was selected for a student showcase. At the end of the night, a gallery owner approached me. He said my work had something honest in it, something raw but clear. He wanted to include 2 of my pieces in a summer exhibition. It was the first time I felt seen not as a problem to solve or a story to explain, but simply as an artist. I still had days when the grief returned. Sometimes, it hit during cat moments, like folding laundry or waiting at the bus stop. But those feelings no longer held power over me. They were echoes, not anchors. And in their place, I was slowly growing something new. A self not shaped by guilt or defiance, but by choice. I wasn't Stephanie the runaway or Stephanie the disappointment. I was Stephanie the designer. Stephanie the roommate. Stephanie the survivor. And for the first time, that was more than enough. I turned 23 on a Sunday. There was no tension in the air. No cold silence at the breakfast table. No waiting for someone to remember. Instead, I woke up in a warm apartment that smelled like pancakes and vanilla candles. Jessica had decorated the living room with paper stars, and Rachel baked a chocolate cake from scratch. Even though she insisted she didn't know how to bake, it wasn't extravagant. There were no expensive gifts. No curated guest list. Just friends. Folding chairs. off-key singing, and laughter that came easily. When they brought out the cake, someone asked me to make a wish. I stared at the flickering candles for a long time. Then I said, out loud and without hesitation. Losing their support didn't break me. It forced me to discover who I really am. No one clapped. No one needed to. They just smiled. Like they understood exactly what I meant. After the party, I sat on the balcony alone for a few minutes, listening to the city buzz faintly in the background. I thought about where I had been 1 year ago, standing in the rain, holding 2 suitcases, heart pounding, throat tight. I thought about the girl who had stood on that porch, stunned and silent, unsure if she'd make it through the week. And then I thought about who I had become. My internship had turned into a full-time role at the design firm. I worked on real campaigns, built my portfolio, and signed my first lease without needing a cosigner. I tracked every dollar I earned, learned how to build credit, set up an emergency fund. For the first time in my life, money was no longer a leash. It was a tool I used on my own terms. My contact with my parents stayed minimal. A birthday card arrived late, unsigned. An email came in the spring, suggesting we start fresh, with no mention of what had happened. I replied once, calmly, clearly, firmly. I wasn't interested in rebuilding something they had never truly valued, not unless they were willing to take responsibility. They weren't, so I let the silence stand. It no longer felt like punishment. It felt like peace. I still heard things through extended family. They had recovered from the financial disruption, blamed it on system errors and credit monitoring software. They never once suspected I had anything to do with it. In their version of the story, they were the victims of unfortunate timing, and that was fine with me. Because the truth was, they didn't matter anymore. Not like they used to. The real revenge was never about their suffering. It was about building a life so full, so grounded, so deeply mine, that their rejection couldn't touch it. It was about stepping outside the cage they built and realizing I didn't need to look back. Justice didn't come in the form of payback. It came in the quiet moments, signing my own paycheck, waking up in a space I chose, being loved by people who asked for nothing in return. It came in learning how to breathe without permission, and in knowing, beyond any doubt, that I would never again shrink myself to fit someone else's idea of who I should be. I didn't win because they lost. I won because they no longer get to decide whether I win at all.